Hi, this is Father Bill W. here in Austin, Texas, and I want to welcome you once again to the podcast. As most of you know, I'm an Episcopal priest in long-term recovery. I've had the gift since December 27th of 1972. And I think that's not as significant as is the fact that about 28 years ago now, I guess it was, I kind of stumbled onto something called two-way prayer. I was studying the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, really began looking into the Oxford group and where our program came from. And this form of prayer that they used to do that somehow got lost and never got communicated into the big book. It's there, but you got to kind of know what you're looking for if you want to find it. So I started studying that, doing that, and totally changed my life. And did a workshop this past week with some of the good folks up in Toronto, Canada. We did a Zoom workshop on two-way prayer. Had about 500 people show up for that. And I want to say special thanks to Ali and the folks who helped put that event together. And we're doing two more workshops coming up. I got one on April 10th, which is the regular second Saturday of the month, and doing one for Big Book Awakening. They're doing some really good work out there, getting people to take a deeper look at what's behind the deeper workings of the Big Book program. That one's going to be on Saturday, April 24th. No need to register for either one of those. Just show up. If you will drop me a line, I'll be happy to send you a flyer on each of them that give you the times and dates and all that good stuff. We're in the middle of our series right now. We're studying the book Ego and Archetype by Dr. Edward Edinger. Kind of heavy stuff. In the last few episodes, we focused on the workings of the ego. And the ego, of course, is the small self, the I that I think that I am. And we're looking at it in terms of its relationship to what Jung called the self, but that's with a capital S. So call it the greater self. And the greater self is really our true identity. It's the center of not only our conscious mind, but our unconscious mind. It's like a different center. But the little ego, and this is the problem, the little ego, the center of our conscious mind, thinks it's the center of everything, see? Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our trouble. And the truth is, it actually is, because we have identified with the wrong self. Big Book says the great reality is within. I think what Jung would say is the great reality is God, and it is this self. We don't have a time to really get into a full review of where we've been in this series, but I think what's important for this episode is the fact that in our consciousness, Edinger says we're going to spiral between states of inflation. And that's where we take on godlike qualities ourselves. And then we feel lost and alone, alienated. Why? Because at some level of consciousness, we're aware that we have overstepped our right relationship with God. And it's at that point that we really need to experience acceptance, unconditional acceptance and forgiveness from God. And if we don't, we can get ourselves really trapped. So our problem is not in having an ego, but our problem is in having an ego that thinks it's God, you know? And our stories, our great stories in religious traditions, they try to deal with some of the great problems that people have, and this is, of course, we looked at this last time. This is the Adam and Eve story. It's giving in to that temptation to be God. But there's a twist to this, you see, and the twist is if you don't give in to the inflation, you're going to stay naive. I mean, you take the story of Adam and Eve, hey, and what's at the heart of the story? God says, now you can touch every tree, you can eat of the fruit of every single tree in the garden, except for this one. And I mean, immediately we know where they're going. I know where I'm going, huh? I want that special tree. See? So I'm going to learn something from this. If I just stay totally obedient and totally naive and totally childlike, uh, there's not going to be a growth in consciousness. So, in order to grow in consciousness, inflation plays a part. You see, we're going to inflate, but then it's like a child rebelling against its parents, has to do it. But then the parents have to know that it's just being a child, and they have to welcome him back when he repents. You see, and there's the process. It goes on and on and on. Uh, so there's a relationship between this ego and this greater self. And it's a vitally important relationship, connection. Is it flowing? Is the grace and the love and the energy flowing between the two? Or am I cut off from it and feeling alone, separated, isolated, and stay in that condition long enough, I'm going to be into despair. So I want to look at a couple of Bible stories because that's what Edinger gets into in this part of the book, and don't let that scare you away. Like I say, it's these great stories are there to communicate human truths. I don't take them literally, not most of them. I take them as metaphors. I take them as stories that are there to teach us something today. They're not so much history as they are faith stories. So there's a guy by the name of Walter Brueggemann. He's an Old Testament scholar, and he studies the Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, and he breaks it down into three parts. And this is what's important. This is not in Edinger's book, but I think it's a worthwhile detour. He says the three parts of the Old Testament are the law, the prophets, and the wisdom literature. And that this parallels the growth that we go through in our human consciousness. And so the law, what's the law? The law is the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. Do this and don't do that. And it's kind of like a kid who is learning. And you're not going to get terribly sophisticated with the 2-year-old or the 3-year-old. Do this, don't do that. Stay out of the street. Don't hit Johnny. Simple, easy to get lessons. The law. All right. And that's where we start. And if you don't have that law, you're not going to have a firm foundation to build on. So it's absolutely necessary for that stage of development, but it's immature. And so then comes the next stage of evolution in our relationship with God, in our relationship with ourselves, our deeper selves, eh? And that is what? It's the prophets. The law says this, but I say that. The law says this, but the Lord says that. It's the adolescent phase, it's the challenging phase, it's the don't be a fundamentalist. You know, you've got to think your way and feel your way through life. You can't just live it by these rules and rigid regulations. All right. So this is higher than the law. Um, and more is revealed through it, so you can't stay a child forever. It's time to grow up. And I see a lot of this in the program. It's like, don't drink and go to meetings. Well, I think that's really good. And it's really important for maybe several years even, you know? Keep it simple, basic, boom, boom, boom. But if after 10, 15, 20 years, that's all I've got, don't drink, go to meetings, don't drink, go to meetings, then I haven't grown. I haven't gone deeper through the steps, through the process, through developing an alive relationship with God and with myself, and even with, Jung would say, with my inner world. So finally, Brueggemann comes to the third phase, and this is what is known as the wisdom literature. It's not very big, but it's the Psalms, it's the wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. There's a time for every purpose under heaven, time to be born, a time to die. It's wisdom. It's we have the law, then we have the prophets, and then when you're really ready, uh, you're ready for the wisdom. Um, kind of like, we're going to touch on this, the Serenity Prayer. It's the wisdom that we are seeking at the end of that prayer. So uh, there's one more book in the wisdom literature, and it's a strange book. It's called the Book of Job, and that book is really about human consciousness, and it deals with bad things happening to good people. It deals with the question of human suffering. And that is a really tough subject, and one that requires a great deal of wisdom. Uh, and maybe it gets right to the heart of our questions about what it means to be a human being. Bad things happening to good people. You probably know the story about Rabbi Harold Kushner. He wrote a book on this subject. And Kushner tells this story. He says, people come up to me all the time and they say, Rabbi, you're the guy who wrote, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? And Kushner always objects strongly. He says, no, no, no. I never wrote that book. I wrote the book when bad things happen to good people. The why bad things happen to good people, I could never write that book, he said. Not enough wisdom in the rabbi's mind to answer that question. It's the human condition, and it's the one that we really, really fight against. But we know bad things do happen to good people. And that's what's behind the story of Job. Where is God in the midst of our human suffering? And both Edinger and Jung, they put tremendous emphasis on the book of Job. And they say it's actually the turning point of the Hebrew scriptures. And I think it's the turning point of our own relationship with God. It's when we move into a wisdom relationship and not just an adolescent or even a younger one with God. It's a more mature level of acceptance of some very, very deep truths. So the story of Job in a real nutshell, eh? And it's that Job was, a good and honorable man, God fearing, wealthy. God had treated him really nicely. Uh, people respected him. They bowed to him when he came into town. All right, and that's kind of, put this in parentheses, that there was a little inflation going on in Job's life, maybe more so than Job was aware of himself, or that even the story attests to. We've all got those inflations, and we're not very aware of them, and that's the truth. See, so there's Job, God's righteous man, and the scene switches up to heaven, and there's Satan walking around heaven. Interesting concept. Uh, and he's talking to God, and he says, "Hey, how's your little boy Job doing down there?" God says, "Doing really well. A wonderful, wonderful, righteous man. Couldn't be better." Uh, and the tempter, says what? He says, "Yeah, I know why he's doing so well. It's because you've gifted him with all sorts of things. Give me permission to throw a little trouble his way, and let's see how grateful and loving Job is towards you. God says, okay, go ahead. And so Satan goes about and he brings great suffering into the life of Job. He loses his flocks, he loses his money, he loses his children. They're taken away, death, suffering, pain. How you doing now, Job? Well, the point of the story is that Job persists. He continues. He continues to say, God is good. Life is good. In spite of all of the suffering that he is going through. His friends come to visit him. And they say, Job, you must have done something wrong to deserve all of this pain and suffering that's coming your way. And Job says, no, I don't think so. Well, when I was a kid, I did some things wrong, yes. But no, nothing really bad. Stuff's just happening to me. And it hurts and it's terrible. But I don't think I'm responsible for it. I don't think I'm being punished by God for some guilt. No, that's not it. His wife says to him, hey, why don't you give up, curse God and die? Stop with all of this pain that you're inflicting on you and on us. Job perseveres. He endures. It's important words. He doesn't give up. He continues to trust in God throughout. Suffering continues. Job's trust continues. That's the core of the book of Job. And finally, kind of the highlight of the book is God puts in an appearance himself. And we need to look at this story not as literal fact, but in psychological terms, as the ego, the small self, confronting the greater self. Boy, and I think once Edinger starts putting that into your mind, the story takes on new dimensions. It certainly did for me. And this is the way I can really make sense out of this. So out of the whirlwind, God speaks. And God's question, who are you, Job? And who am I? Well, let me tell you. And so God does. And so think of this as the greater self speaking to our smaller egos who have confused our identity with thinking that we are the greater self. No, we're not. So God asks, where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you know and understand who settled its dimensions. Surely you know who stretched his measuring line over it. On what do its supporting pillars rest? Think you're hot stuff, Job? Listen to me. Have you descended to the springs of the sea or walked in the unfathomable deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you ever seen the doorkeepers of the place of darkness? Have you comprehended the vast expanse of the world? Edinger says this, the ego is being reminded that it knows nothing about the psyche in its totality. The part cannot comprehend the whole. You see, the part, the ego part, cannot comprehend the greater part. And this is the temptation that we get ourselves into. That this little ego is going to try to understand what it is incapable of understanding. That the conscious mind will never understand or control the unconscious mind. That the unconscious, uh, which is where God lives, which is where spirit lives, which is where intuition and inspiration come from. All right. Well, it can also be a place of great pain, but it's certainly something that is greater than I. And my little ego likes to think it's its equal or even better. See, so how does Job respond to all of this? And this is key. Job says this: I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I now know my place and repent in dust and ashes. The little ego sees the greater self. The little ego in us hears the voice. And this is what I think is really happening in two-way prayer. I mean, I've been teaching this for 20 some odd years now, and I hear people find a voice inside, a loving voice that speaks to them from a place of wisdom and authority that they don't have. And it comforts them and it loves them and it welcomes them into a greater experience of wisdom. And I'm going to underline that word experience, because that's what Edinger is saying happens here as a result of this encounter. I had heard of you before, but now I see you. Now I have an experience of you, you see. Job got his answer. And the greater self, God, in effect, is saying, I am the way I am. Life is the way life is. Accept the things you cannot change. Change the things you can, hey? And wisdom to know the difference, an invitation to wisdom, all right? Another book that a piece of wisdom literature that Edinger quotes in this little section. He says, wisdom brings up her own sons and cares for those who seek her. For though she takes him at first through winding ways, bringing fear and faintness on him, plaguing him with her discipline until she can trust him, and testing him with her ordeals, in the end, she will lead him back to the straight road and reveal her secrets to him. Pain and suffering. Pain and suffering. I don't know anybody who comes into the program who doesn't get here via the road of pain and suffering. And so we have to ask ourselves, did we find meaning through that pain and suffering, or did we not? Is the world just a cruel place that God has developed within which we can suffer? See, I had that attitude for a long time. This is just a painful place, and I was pissed at God because in my own godness, I would have made a different world. You see, I wasn't living life on life's terms. I was sitting there at the end of the bar drinking, saying, damn, if I'd made this world, I'd have made it differently, So, according to Edinger, Job is the carrier of the divine fate, and that gives meaning to his suffering and liberation to his soul. So the worst fate, they say, is to lose sight of meaning and purpose in our lives. That we can put up with hunger, with thirst. We can go for long times in poverty, long times experiencing pain. We cannot go very long if we lose meaning and purpose in our lives. Viktor Frankl, the Jewish psychiatrist who endured, there it is again, the concentration camps. And that was the lesson that he took out of those camps, was that if people lost hope, if they lost meaning and purpose, they were done for. It was just a matter of time before they were going to go in the ovens. That they could go without food, they could go without water, but they couldn't go without meaning and purpose. Brilliant not discovery, but appreciation for how vital that is in all of our lives. And lots of us who've been around the program for a long time, people with 10 years, 20 years, sometimes 25, 30 years, hey, they've gone without a drink, they've gone without a drug, but they commit suicide. They commit suicide. They either lost meaning and purpose or they never found it. And you can't go without that, you see? Somebody summed up the story of Job like this. He said it this way, and I meditated on this for a number of months because it was just so profoundly true and so beyond my ego. But it boiled down to this: though you slay me, yet will I put my trust in you. You see, though you slay me, yet will I put my trust in you. Where else is it going to go? Is it going to go in your ego? Good luck. Is it going to go into money, into power, into sex? And good luck. We've been that route. It's living life on life's terms. And then that's what this is about, hey? Not denying human suffering, not running away from it, not hiding from it, not anesthetizing ourselves with alcohol, pills, food, sex, whatever, hey? And it's to stop asking, what is the meaning of life? That really demanding, what is the meaning of life? And to start asking, what is the meaning of my life? The first question I may never know. The second, there I have a shot. And that is the beginning of real wisdom. Let me quote Edinger at a little bit of length here. He says, the Job drama is personally applicable to all. It speaks immediately to the almost universal question, why must this happen to me? We all have an underlying resentment against fate and reality, which is a residue of inflation. Such resentment takes many forms. If only I had had a better childhood. If only I were married. If only I were not married. If only I had a better husband or wife, etc., etc. All of these if onlys are the means by which one excuses himself from relating productively to reality as it is. They are symptoms of inflation, which will not grant the existence of a greater reality than one's personal desires. Job asked why his misery should happen to him. The answer that emerges from the book of Job is so that he may see God. There is pain, there is suffering in this world. It's a broken world. But here's the thing: suffering endured, pain gone through, can lead us to the other side. And it's there that we find God. We all know the Serenity Prayer, hey? It's in the second half of that prayer that we never get to say that really gives the answer to accepting life on life's terms. Let me read it for you now. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as we would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if we surrender to your will, so we may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Some people have a lot of hardship in their lives, and yet they find meaning and purpose. I sobered up in Detroit. I'll never forget. There was a woman there who lost both of her daughters in a fire. had no kids. And she was one of the happiest and most productive people I had ever met. And I asked her about it one day, because it would have destroyed me, but didn't destroy her. Maybe at one level it did, but at another, she went through it and she came out the other side. And she said to me, Bill, you know, I've got 100 daughters now. And she sponsored more people in Detroit and was mother to more young women than anybody else in that city. See, she had gone through the fire and she had changed at a very, very deep level. She had wisdom, so much more than to this day that I could ever even conceive of having. And then some people, the slightest thing is going to set them off. They didn't get what they wanted, so I'm out of here. you know um, to endure, to persist, uh, to meet God in the suffering, to go through it. And that's what it's about. See, pain can change us, or pain can break us open. I want to close with some wisdom literature. Uh, it's a modern version of one of the Psalms. It's Psalm 130, and this is a version written by Stephen Mitchell. I really like his work, and I think it kind of sums up what we've been talking about here in this episode. It goes like this: Out of the depths, Lord, I call you. Let me feel you, even in my darkness. Take away my affliction, or give me the strength to endure. If all our mistakes were indelible, which of us could survive? But you have forgiven us, even when we cannot forgive ourselves. I listen for you, Lord. My soul waits more intently than a soldier watching for the dawn. Answer me, open my heart, so that I can wholly receive you, and teach me that when I am ready, you will let this suffering pass. Oh, heavy episode here. Sorry about that, but life is hard, and here, and we're going through it, guys. So I hope you're able to take something, some message away from this episode, and that it's going to help you in dealing with your life, and if you're suffering through some pains and some difficulties, to know that you can come out the other end of that and come out stronger for it. It doesn't have to sink you. So thank you for listening. Happy Easter coming up, and happy Passover, and keep the faith. God bless. Keep coming back.